What if I told you that the holiday you consider humanity's most ancient tradition was actually invented only 3 times, and each time for manipulation? Your Christmas tree, champagne, midnight chimes, gifts under the tree. All of this is not the folk wisdom of centuries, but the result of czars' decrees, papal bulls, and corporate advertising campaigns. The story they've fed you about New Year's is a polished version for greeting cards and family dinners. Neat, magical, ancient, and thoroughly fake. Reality is a parade of violent reforms when czars had to force people to celebrate on the right day under threat of punishment. This is the story of how the Vatican moved the beginning of the year several times, erasing entire weeks from the calendar. This is the tale of how the Nazis turned a family holiday into racial propaganda, replacing baby Jesus with a swastika. And this is the truth about how the modern economy squeezes $600 billion out of you in one December. Forget everything they told you in school history lessons. January 1st is not the natural beginning of the year. This is an arbitrary date that was forcibly imposed 3 times. First by the Roman dictator Julius Caesar, then by Pope Gregory XIII, then by Russian Tsar Peter the Great. Each time, people were forced to celebrate on a new day, and each time it was an act of power over time, over consciousness, over the very rhythm of millions of lives. Did you think your dead Moroz or Santa Claus was an ancient character from fairy tales? He was invented by marketers. Did you believe that the tradition of giving gifts goes back to the depths of the centuries? It was created by stores. Did you think decorating a tree was a pagan custom? This is a 16th century invention. Did you think you were hard to fool? That you could easily distinguish a real tradition from an invented one? Today will be unpleasant for you. It will hurt. But most importantly, you will finally see clearly. I will break down 33 facts that will demolish everything you've been told about the most #2 holiday. 33 proofs that New Year's was invented at least 3 times, and never for you. Each fact is a blow to your cozy worldview. Each number is a nail in the coffin of ancient traditions. Get ready. We're about to stage a real revolution in your knowledge. And after this, you'll never celebrate January 1st the same way again. Fact 1. The first invention of New Year's, Babylon, 2,000 years. Imagine, you're standing on the banks of the Euphrates in ancient Babylon. March, early spring, barley sowing time. Around you are crowds of people, temple processions, priests in ceremonial robes. You're witnessing the Akitu festival, the first organized New Year's celebration in human history. 12 days of rituals, sacrifices, theatrical battles of gods. And now, the main point. No January 1st. None at all. The Mesopotamians celebrated the beginning of the year in March or April, when nature awakened, when they could sow grain and hope for a harvest. This was survival logic, not an arbitrary date on the Roman calendar. The myth they fed you. New Year's was always celebrated on January 1st. It's humanity's most ancient tradition, rooted in millennia. A lie. January 1st was invented much later and has nothing to do with ancient Babylon. The Babylonian New Year was tied to the agricultural cycle. The king received power anew, from the gods, through rituals of humiliation. The people watched as the ruler acknowledged his weakness before higher powers. This was a festival of world renewal, the return of order from chaos. But not on January 1st. Remember this date. 2,000 years, BCE, Babylon, March. This is where the history of manipulation begins. This is where power first decides when exactly people should celebrate the beginning of the year, and this is only the first time out of 3. Fact 2. The king was publicly slapped on the cheeks. The main, #4, ritual. And now, the most terrible part. What they don't write about in tourist brochures about ancient civilizations. The 4th day of the Akitu festival. The king of Babylon enters the temple of Marduk, the empire's chief god. The high priest meets him at the altar. And what happens next? The priest strips the crown from the king, removes the scepter, tears off the royal regalia, and then strikes the ruler in the face. Not symbolically, really strikes. On the cheeks, publicly, before a crowd of witnesses. The king had to cry. This was a mandatory condition of the ritual. Tears proved that the ruler was repenting before the gods, that he acknowledged his guilt for all the misfortunes of the past year. If the king cried, the gods forgave him and returned his crown. If he didn't cry, bad sign. Very bad. Imagine this spectacle. The most powerful person in the empire stands before the temple, his face red from slaps, tears running down his cheeks. The crowd watches. The priests observe. This isn't a magical holiday with champagne and a Christmas tree. This is a ritual of public humiliation of power. The myth, ancient celebrations were solemn and noble. Reality, kings were slapped in the face, forced to cry and publicly repent. Here's the magic of New Year's in the ancient world for you. Violence, control, and demonstration of who really controls time. Priests, not kings. A fact 3. Julius Caesar invented New Year's a second time in 46. Fast forward 1500 years. Rome, 46. Julius Caesar, dictator, military genius, a man with an ego the size of an empire, looks at the Roman calendar and realizes, this is a disaster. The Roman year consisted of 10 months and began in March. Yes, you understood correctly. 10 months. December was the 10th month, hence the name. Quote, 7 means, quote, 8 in Latin. But by the 1st century BCE, the calendar had diverged so much from actual seasons that spring festivals were celebrated in winter and autumn ones in summer. Caesar invited the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes. Together they created the Julian calendar, 12 months, 365 days, a leap year every 4 years. And most importantly, the beginning of the year is moved to January 1st. Why January? Caesar chose the month named after the god Janus, the two-faced deity looking simultaneously into the past and future. God of all beginnings, God of doors and transitions, perfect symbol for the beginning of the year, and a perfect political move to consolidate power. On January 1st, 45 BCE, Rome celebrated the first New Year's according to the Julian calendar. This was the second invention of the holiday. Caesar, by force of his power, moved the beginning of the year from March to January. People weren't asked if they wanted this. The dictator decided, the people obeyed. Remember, January 1st is not a divine decree. It's the choice of one man who wanted to organize his empire. Fact 4. January 1st disappeared for 1200 years, and now prepare for a blow. Everything Caesar established disappeared completely for 1200 years. When the Roman Empire fell, the unified calendar collapsed with it. The Christian church seized control over time, and the clergy categorically disliked January 1st, the day of the pagan god Janus. This was a holiday of pagans, drunken orgies, debauchery, unacceptable. Medieval Europe started the year whenever, but just not on January 1st. In different kingdoms, different regions, even different cities, everywhere had their own dates. March 25th, Annunciation, the moment of Christ's conception. March 1st, the old Roman tradition. December 25th, Christmas. Even Easter, a floating holiday that falls on a new date each year. Imagine this chaos. A merchant from Venice arrives in Paris in March 1352. But in France it's still 1351, because they start the year at Easter. And in England, March 25th is considered the beginning. So what year is it there? Unclear. Nobody knew exactly what year it was. Contracts were signed with confusion in dates. Trade turned into a nightmare. But the church didn't care. The main thing, don't celebrate on the pagan day. January 1st was forgotten, erased from memory. For 1200 years, Caesar invented the holiday, the church killed it. And this is only the beginning of the story. Fact 5. The Vatican invented New Year's a third time, by decree of Pope Gregory XIII. February 24th, 1582. Vatican, Papal Palace. Pope Gregory XIII signs the bull, quote, 10:11. This document will change the life of all Europe and reinvent New Year's again. By the 16th century, Caesar's Julian calendar had accumulated an error of 10 days. The spring equinox, which should have been on March 21st, fell on March 11th. Easter, the main Christian holiday, was calculated incorrectly. The Church couldn't tolerate this. Gregory created a new system, the Gregorian calendar, more accurate, with corrected leap years. But most importantly, he reaffirmed January 1st as the official beginning of the year, the third invention of the holiday, this time by papal decree. Catholic countries adopted the reform immediately: Spain, Portugal, Italy, Poland. In October 1582, these countries went to sleep on October 4th and woke up on October 15th. 10 days were simply crossed out of history. They ceased to exist. You didn't exist for 10 days. Such was the Pope's will. But Protestant and Orthodox countries resisted. They didn't want to submit to the papal decree. A war of calendars began that lasted centuries. January 1st became New Year's again, but only for those who obeyed the Vatican. The rest stubbornly celebrated on their own dates. Europe split not only by religion, but also by time. Fact 6. England resisted for 2 centuries because of hatred for Catholics. Pope Gregory XIII issued his bull in 1582. Catholic Europe submitted. Protestant England told the Vatican where to go. Elizabeth I was on the throne. England had just broken away from Rome, created its own Anglican church, executed Catholics, and fought the Spanish Armada. And now the Pope says, accept my calendar, cross out 10 days from October, start the year on January 1st. The English reaction was predictable. No way. The Gregorian calendar was called a papist plot. Protestant pamphlets screamed that this was the Vatican's attempt to regain control over England through manipulation of time. Better to live with the wrong calendar than submit to the Pope. That was English logic. Decades passed. The Julian calendar diverged more and more from astronomical reality. Trade with continental Europe turned into a nightmare. Different dates, different years, confusion in contracts. Scientists begged kings to conduct reform. Even Isaac Newton proposed his own calendar variant. Ignored. Only in 1750 did Parliament finally pass the quote, 168 years had passed since the papal bull. 168 years of stubbornness based on religious hatred. England agreed to celebrate New Year's on January 1st, not because it was correct, but because economic losses became unbearable. Here's the truth about quote 15. They were adopted not out of love for history, but from political calculation. The calendar is a weapon of power. Fact 7. 11 days vanished from Britain's lives. September 2nd, 1752. Britons went to sleep on Wednesday, woke up on Thursday, September 14th. 11 days were simply crossed out of existence. Not 10, like the Catholics in the 16th century. 11. Over 170 years, the Julian calendar error accumulated one more extra day. Parliament decided, we're crossing everything out at once. The 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th of September. These dates didn't exist. Never. They didn't exist in British history. Imagine the chaos. People born on these days lost their birthdays. Contracts signed with dates in this interval became invalid. Rent, taxes, debts, everything had to be recalculated. Someone was supposed to pay in 3 days, and those 3 days ceased to exist. Through the streets of London walked crowds of outraged people. They chanted, quote, 16 people were convinced the government had stolen part of their lives. Literally stolen. 11 days of existence they could have lived, and didn't. Authorities explained, it's just a calendar correction. Nobody lost real time. But people didn't care. They felt deceived, robbed of time. And they were right. Power was again manipulating their perception of reality. January 1st became the official New Year's in Britain, not voluntarily, not out of respect for traditions, but by force of a parliamentary act that erased 11 days from the country's history. Fact 8. Peter the Great forced Russia to celebrate New Year's under threat of punishment. December 20th, 1699, Moscow. Peter the Great issues a decree that will overturn the life of all Russia. Starting January 1st, 1700, a new way. The year begins not on September 1st, as it had been for 8 centuries, but on January 1st, and celebrating, mandatory. Before this, Russes lived by the Byzantine calendar. The year began in autumn, on September 1st, on the day when, according to legend, God created the world. This was an ancient Orthodox tradition, but Peter decided Russia must become European, and Europe celebrates on January 1st. Therefore, Russia will too. The decree was harsh. Every homeowner was obligated to decorate gates, doors, and streets with fir, juniper, or pine branches. The wealthy had to put up whole trees. The poor were allowed to make do with a small branch. But decorate, mandatory. Who doesn't decorate will be punished. On January 1st, festivities, fireworks, cannon fire, treats in the streets. Have fun, the Tsar's order. Moreover, the fun should last 7 days, a week. Imagine, you wake up on an ordinary winter day that used to be the middle of the year, and they tell you, come on, celebrate, it's New Year's. Don't want to? Too bad. Peter didn't ask the people's opinion. He didn't hold referendums. He didn't explain why this was good. He simply ordered, and people obeyed. Because disobeying Peter meant big trouble. That's how Russia fell in love with New Year's, not through tradition, through coercion. Fact 9. The first Russian New Year's, to the thunder of cannons and fireworks. January 1st, 1700, Red Square, freezing cold, crowds of people who don't quite understand what's happening. And Peter the Great personally opens the celebration. The Tsar fires a cannon. The thunder spreads across Moscow. The first shot is followed by a second, third, 10th. Artillery salute announces the beginning of a new year and a new era. Peter wants this to be remembered, wants the sound of cannons to be etched in memory and forever associated with January 1st. Then, fireworks. In Russia, they had hardly been seen before Peter. This was a novelty, foreign technology. The sky over Moscow explodes with lights, colored sparks, smoke. People look up, enchanted and frightened simultaneously. Tables with treats are set up in the streets. Wine flows like a river. Musicians play. Actors perform shows. All this by the Tsar's order. Peter understands. For the new holiday to take root, you need spectacle. You need a show. You need people to remember this day as something grand. The festivities continued for 7 days. Each day, new entertainment, new salutes, new performances. Peter monitored to ensure the people were having fun. This wasn't voluntary celebration. This was a demonstration of power. The Tsar was showing, I can change the very course of time. I decide when the year begins, and you will celebrate when I say. The people were in shock. For ordinary people, January 1st was just an ordinary winter day. But now it's New Year's, because Peter decided so. Fact 10. Priests declared New Year's. Quote 18. Patriarch Adrian, head of the Russian Orthodox Church, didn't hide his outrage. He perceived Peter's decree about moving New Year's as blasphemy. For 800 years, Russes celebrated the beginning of the year on September 1st. This was a Byzantine tradition, sanctified by the Church, connected to the biblical act of world creation. And now, the Tsar cancels everything with one stroke of the pen, and forces celebration on a day that has no sacred meaning for the Orthodox Church. Adrian wrote outraged letters. He said, January 1st is the day when pagans celebrated Janus, the Roman idol with 2 faces. This is a day of demonic amusements, drunkenness, and debauchery. True Christians should not participate in this abominable act. Priests throughout the country preached against the new holiday. They called it, Quote 19. An attempt to turn the people from true faith. Decorating homes with tree branches, a pagan custom. Worship of nature instead of God. Firing cannons and launching fireworks. Sinful wastefulness and intimidation of the people. But Peter was stronger than the patriarch. Much stronger. A few years after Adrian's death, the Tsar would abolish the patriarchate altogether and subordinate the church to the state. For now, he simply ignores the protests. The people found themselves between two fires. On one side, the Tsar demands celebration. On the other, priests say it's a sin. People celebrated because they feared the Tsar more than God. This is how the tradition of the quote 20 was born, through conflict between power and church, through fear and coercion. Fact 11. France celebrated New Year's at Easter until the 16th century. Paris, mid-16th century. The French still can't agree on when the year begins, because different regions of the country have different traditions. In Paris, the year began at Easter. Problem: Easter is a floating holiday. Each year it falls on a different date, depending on the lunar cycle and spring equinox. Sometimes it's March, sometimes April. The year could begin on March 22nd, and the next year, April 15th. In Provence, they celebrated on March 25th, at Annunciation. In Burgundy, at Easter, but by a different calculation. In Lyon, at Christmas, December 25th. Each region stubbornly held to its tradition. France was a patchwork quilt of incompatible calendars. Merchants were going crazy. A contract signed in Paris in March could be considered concluded last year in Lyon. Taxes were collected in chaos. Courts were confused with dates. The administrative system was cracking at the seams. King Charles IX in 1564 issued the Edict of Roussillon. He ordered all of France to start the year on January 1st. Single date, single calendar, single control. But this was still before the Pope's Gregorian reform. France adopted January 1st earlier than the Vatican officially approved it. Why? Because the king needed order, needed power over time. January 1st became New Year's in France, not because it was an ancient tradition, but because the king was tired of chaos and ordered celebration on a day convenient for him. Fact 12. Scotland beat England by 152 years, year 1600. Scotland officially moves the beginning of the year to January 1st. England at this time still stubbornly celebrates on March 25th. Two neighbouring kingdoms, speaking one language, professing Protestantism, feuding and trading with each other, living in different years. Imagine the absurdity of this situation. A merchant from Edinburgh crosses the border in January. In Scotland, it's already the new year. In England, still the old. A contract signed in Edinburgh on February 1st, 1601, in London is dated 1600. Confusion in documents, disputes in courts, economic nightmare. Why did Scotland adopt January 1st so early? Not out of love for traditions, not out of respect for history, but because Scots traded with continental Europe more than with England. France, Holland, Scandinavian countries had already switched to January 1st. It was advantageous for Scotland to synchronise with them. England, however, could afford stubbornness. It had a huge empire, powerful fleet, developed trade. Let the whole world live by the Gregorian calendar. England will use Julian, until economic losses become too great. For 152 years, Scotland and England lived in a calendar gap. And only in 1707, when they signed the Act of Union and united the kingdoms, did the problem become critical. England needed another 45 years to surrender and accept January 1st. This is how, quote 21, were born, through economic necessity and political pressure. No magic, only calculation. Fact 13. The Nazis transformed Christmas and New Year's into racial propaganda. Germany, January 30th, 1933. Adolf Hitler becomes Reich Chancellor. Within a few months, systematic work begins to change cultural traditions. Winter holidays, the first target. Alfred Rosenberg, chief ideologist of the NSDAP, author of The Myth of the 20th Century, formulates the problem. Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem, came from a Jewish family. Christmas is a celebration of the birth of a representative of the Semitic race. For an ideology built on the concept of Aryan supremacy, this creates a logical contradiction. Rosenberg proposes a solution: return to pre-Christian Germanic traditions. The winter solstice festival, Yulefest, existed among ancient Germanic tribes long before Christianization. This is a pagan holiday connected to the astronomical cycle, sun worship, belief in nature's rebirth. The Ministry of Propaganda under Joseph Goebbels' leadership begins a campaign. Brochures with instructions on how to properly celebrate Germanic Christmas are issued. Teachers receive methodological materials for schools. Party organizations send recommendations to NSDAP members' families. The name '24 Weihnachten is preserved, but the content changes. This is no longer a celebration of Christ's birth. This is a celebration of Germanic strength, Aryan family, racial community. Christian elements are gradually displaced by pagan symbols, runes, sun wheels, images of ancient gods. The process doesn't happen immediately. In 33, these are still recommendations. By 37, insistent instructions. By 41, practically mandatory norms for party members and SS. In 12 years, the regime manages to change the perception of the holiday among a significant part of the population. Fact 14. Swastikas instead of stars. Führer instead of Christ. Specific changes affected every element of the traditional holiday. The Star of Bethlehem atop the tree, a Christian symbol pointing the way for the Magi. It was replaced with a swastika, runes, sun wheel, or iron cross. By 1939, in SS members' homes, use of the Christian star was considered undesirable. Christmas songs were rewritten. Silent Night, Stille Nacht, the most famous Christmas song in German-speaking space. Joseph Moore's original 1818 text contained lines about Christ the Savior. The new version, distributed from 1937, contained different words. Instead of Christ, the Führer was mentioned as the nation's savior. Christmas cards demonstrated the new aesthetic. Traditional images of the Holy Family in the manger were replaced with scenes of Aryan families by the fireplace, torchlight processions, Germanic warriors against runic backgrounds. Greeting text changed. Instead of religious formulas, political slogans appeared. Children's gifts were selected according to ideological criteria. Dolls were produced with specific anthropological characteristics: blonde hair, blue eyes, facial features corresponding to racial standards. Toy weapons, military equipment models, books about party heroes became standard contents of holiday gifts. Educational institutions received special instructions on conducting holiday events. School trees were decorated with national symbols. Children learned new songs, recited poems about the nation's greatness and the country's leadership. Traditional biblical stories were replaced with Germanic legends and myths. Fact 15. The Reich Postal Service stamped text from a rewritten song. 1937. Reichspost, the state postal service, issues special holiday stamps. The text on them, quote, 26, quote, this is a rewritten line from quote, 27, quote, where the word quote, 28, quote, is replaced with quote, 29, quote, postal stamps aren't a private initiative. This is an official state instrument. Every letter and card passing through the postal system in December received this imprint. Millions of postal items carried this formulation throughout the country. People sent holiday cards to relatives, greetings to colleagues, business letters to partners. On each envelope, a stamp with the altered text of a sacred song. Repetition created habituation. What at first might have seemed unusual, after a few years became the norm. Christian churches found themselves in a difficult position. Open protest meant conflict with the state. Silent consent, refusal to defend sacred texts. Some clergy tried to resist. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Protestant theologian, openly criticized attempts to change the Christian content of holidays. He was arrested in April 1943, executed on April 9, 1945, at Flossenburg concentration camp. By the end of the 30s, use of rewritten texts became a mass phenomenon. An entire generation of children grew up listening to new versions of old songs. For them, this was the only familiar form of holiday music. Fact 16. The SS organized production of holiday decorations in concentration camps. Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, created the Ahnenerbe organization to study Germanic history and traditions. One project was the revival of pagan holiday rituals. This required special items: Yule lanterns, lamps with runes, wooden figures of ancient symbols. Production of these items was organized in concentration camps. Dachau, Buchenwald, and other camps had workshops where prisoners manufactured holiday decorations. This was part of the general system of forced labor for inmates. SS officers received these products as official gifts from command. Special sets included candles, lanterns, wall decorations with runes and pagan symbols. They were distributed among SS members for use in family celebrations. The system functioned according to the standard economic logic of concentration camps. Free labor produced goods for state structures' needs. Holiday decorations were just one of many types of products manufactured by prisoners. SS officers' families celebrated using these items. Children received gifts, adults decorated homes, lit candles in special lanterns. The origin of these things wasn't discussed. This was the norm of the system's functioning. Fact 17. In the GDR, they continued singing melodies from the Third Reich period. May 1945. Germany capitulated. The territory is divided among allies. The Eastern Zone becomes the German Democratic Republic under USSR control. The denazification process included banning symbols, punishing criminals, rewriting textbooks. But the cultural sphere proved more complex. Many songs created or rewritten during the period from 33 to 45 remained in the population's memory. GDR authorities chose a pragmatic approach. Melodies were preserved, texts rewritten. National Socialist ideology mentions were removed, socialist rhetoric added. The musical structure remained the same. Why not create completely new songs? Because the generation that grew up in the 30s and 40s knew these melodies from childhood. This was their emotional connection to the holiday. Replacing melodies meant creating a cultural rupture. Some musicologists later called this, quote, 31 ideological system, borrowed ready-made forms from another, filling them with new content. Practical, but historically questionable. Today, researchers discover that some holiday songs popular in the GDR have roots in the Third Reich period. Most people who sang them didn't know this history. A fact 18. In the USSR, they connected New Year's with Stalin's birthday. Soviet Union, 30s. Religious holidays weren't officially observed. Christmas was excluded from the calendar. Churches were closed or used for other purposes. But people needed a winter holiday. Authorities created a secular alternative. New Year's became the main winter holiday. On December 28, 1935, the newspaper Pravda published Pavel Postishev's article, quote, 31. This was the official signal for the holiday's revival, but in a new Soviet form. The tree became a New Year's tree, not a Christmas one. Ded Moroz turned into a secular character, not connected to St. Nicholas. All religious elements were removed, replaced with Soviet symbols. December 18th, the official birthday of Joseph Stalin. The gap between this date and New Year's, 13 days. The propaganda machine began using this coincidence. In schools and kindergartens, holiday events were held where both events were mentioned. Posters depicted Stalin alongside New Year's symbols. Cards often contained the leader's portrait together with Ded Moroz. Children learned poems glorifying the country's leadership. The idea was to create an association between winter holidays and the political leader's image. New Year's was supposed to include gratitude to the leader as a natural element of celebration. After 1953, this practice was curtailed. But the generation that grew up in the 30s and 40s retained this association for life. Fact 19. $600 billion in 1 month, 2024. Record. December 2024. MasterCard publishes its Spending Pulse report on holiday spending in the United States. The figure is impressive, $600 billion in 1 month on holiday purchases. This isn't just a large sum. It's almost 10% of all annual consumer spending by Americans, concentrated in 31 days. From November 24th to December 24th, the economy shifts into maximum intensity mode. For comparison, the entire budget of the United Arab Emirates for 2024 was approximately $70 billion. Americans in the holiday month spend 8.5 times more than an entire state in a year. Growth compared to the previous year, 3.8%. This means that even accounting for inflation and economic uncertainty, people are spending more. Every year, more. The curve only goes up. Retail trade shows growth of 3.4%. Restaurants, 3.9%. Online sales grew by 6.7%. All sectors demonstrate increased turnover specifically in December. What does this mean? The economy of modern countries depends on the holiday season. Entire industries plan annual profits with December in mind. Stores hire temporary workers specifically for this month. Warehouses are overflowing with goods. Logistics companies work at capacity limits. New Year's and related holidays aren't just a cultural tradition. This is an economic phenomenon on which entire industries are built. $600 billion. That's the price of the modern holiday. Fact 20. 9% of annual retail profit in 31 days. The National Retail Federation of the USA publishes annual statistics. Data shows a consistent pattern. December consistently brings more money than any other month of the year. In the 90s of the 20th century, holiday sales constituted approximately 11% of annual retail turnover. In the 2010s, this figure decreased slightly to 9–10%. Why the decrease? Because the holiday season stretched out. Previously, active sales began in mid-December. Now, immediately after Thanksgiving, in late November. And in some product categories, even in October. Stores learn to spread holiday sales over a longer period, but the concentration remains impressive. Imagine, a store operates 365 days a year, and approximately 9% of all annual revenue falls on 30 to 40 days. This means that during the holiday period, sales intensity is 2.5 to 3 times higher than average. For many retail companies, December determines whether the year will be profitable. The term, going into the black, transitioning to profitability, appeared precisely in the context of holiday sales. Accounting recorded losses in red ink, profit in black. December moved the annual balance from red to black. This creates the most powerful incentive for aggressive marketing. Companies can't afford a weak December. They invest huge budgets in advertising, create an artificial sense of urgency, manipulate prices, launch loyalty programs. The consumer finds themselves under massive pressure from all sides. Television, internet, radio, outdoor advertising, everything screams, buy, buy, buy. And it works. $600 billion. Proof of this machine's effectiveness. Fact 21. Black Friday, an artificial holiday invented by retailers. The term Black Friday appeared in Philadelphia in the early 60s of the 20th century. Police used it to describe chaos on the day after Thanksgiving. Crowds of shoppers and tourists filled the city center. Traffic jams, crush in stores, increased burden on law enforcement. Retailers didn't like this name. Quote 35 sounded negative. In the 70s, they reinterpreted the term. A beautiful legend appeared. Stores work all year. Quote 36, at a loss. And only on Friday after Thanksgiving do they go, quote 37, quote, into profit. Hence the name. The legend is beautiful, but historically doubtful. Most stores went into profit long before December, but the story stuck. It created the right narrative. This day is special, critically important for the economy. In the 80s, Black Friday became a national phenomenon. Stores began opening at 6 a.m. instead of the usual 9. Shoppers lined up from the night before to get in first. Television showed reports about crushes at store entrances. By the 2000s, this turned into a full-fledged, quote, 38 stores opened at midnight. Then, at 10 p.m. Thursday, essentially eating into the family holiday of Thanksgiving. Store workers were forced to interrupt dinner with family to go on shift. In the 2010s, the phenomenon went beyond the USA. Great Britain, Canada, Australia, European countries, everywhere began copying the format. Despite the fact that these countries don't have Thanksgiving, they simply copied the date and name. Then appeared Cyber Monday, Grey Friday, China's, quote, 41. The calendar filled with artificial shopping holidays, each created by marketers, each pursuing one goal: make people buy. Tradition? No. Cultural heritage? No. Pure marketing that turned into a social phenomenon in 50 years. Fact 22. Scarcity psychology, the main weapon of New Year's sales. Go to any online store website in December. You'll see the same techniques. Countdown timer, quote 42 inscription, quote 43 indicator, quote 44 notification. These aren't random design elements. This is the result of decades of research in behavioral economics. Psychologists have identified people make irrational decisions under pressure of artificial scarcity. The principle works simply. When a product seems rare or available for limited time, the brain switches from rational analysis mode to hurry and grab mode. An evolutionary program that helped our ancestors compete for limited resources is now used to sell televisions and smartphones. Classic example: old price crossed out, next to it, new price with discount. Studies show that in 70% of cases, the old price is artificially inflated. The product never sold at that price. But visually, this creates a sense of benefit. Countdown timers, another tool. Sale ends in 2 hours 37 minutes. Have you seen how these timers end and then restart a day later? This isn't an error. This is strategy. Create a sense of urgency. Force immediate purchase without giving time for consideration. Quote 51 classic artificial scarcity technique. Often this indicator isn't connected to actual warehouse stock. It's just a number that changes by algorithm to seem plausible. Marketers call this quote 52, create an environment where a person makes the decision you need while considering it their free choice. The holiday season is ideal time for applying these techniques. People are emotionally open, ready to spend, in a state of, quote 53. Protection from manipulation is weakened. Result: purchases people regret a week later, things that weren't needed, expenses that weren't planned. But at the moment of purchase it seemed, must hurry, it's profitable, it's the last chance. Fact 23. Clothing became 7.8% more expensive during holiday season. MasterCard's report for December 2024 contains an interesting detail. Spending on clothing grew by 7.8% compared to the previous year. It would seem that during the season of sales and discounts, spending should grow slower than prices. After all, everyone promises discounts. But reality is different. People spend more, much more. How does this work? The mechanism is called price anchoring. The store shows a high initial price, the anchor, then demonstrates a discount. The buyer compares not with the real market price, but with the artificial anchor, and thinks they're getting a benefit. Retail metrics research showed the average, quote 55, on Black Friday is 37%. Sounds impressive. But if the initial price was inflated by 50%, the real discount is about 8% from market price. Moreover, many products are specially produced for the holiday season. Manufacturers create simplified versions of popular models, with slightly worse characteristics, cheaper materials. Externally, they look like the original, but cost is significantly lower. These quote 56 quote are sold at a discount from an inflated price. As a result, the store gets standard margin and the buyer lower quality product while thinking they saved. Growth in spending by 7.8% with massive quote 57. This isn't an anomaly. This is proof of system effectiveness. People buy more because they think they're saving. A paradox, but it works. The fashion industry especially depends on the holiday season. Approximately 25 to 30% of annual clothing sales fall on November-December. Brands plan collections, production cycles, advertising campaigns with this period in mind. The consumer thinks they control the situation, that they decide what and when to buy. But the numbers show otherwise. Behavior is predictable and manageable. Fact 24, 200 million people go shopping in one weekend. The National Retail Federation of the USA conducted a survey after Thanksgiving 2024. Result: more than 200 million Americans made purchases during the period from Thursday to Sunday. That's approximately 60% of the entire country's population. 200 million people in 4 days. This isn't spontaneous desire. This is the result of a coordinated multi-month campaign. Holiday sales advertising begins in October. Television commercials, internet banners, email newsletters, SMS messages. By early November, the average American sees several hundred advertising messages about upcoming sales. Stores announce exclusive offers available only during certain hours. FOMO technique, fear of missing out. If you don't go now, you'll lose the benefit. Neighbors will buy, and you won't. Social pressure is created. Colleagues discuss what they're planning to buy. Media publish lists of best deals. Bloggers review discounts. A feeling forms. Everyone is going to stores, and you should too. Average check per person during the holiday weekend, about $400. Multiply by 200 million people, $80 billion in 4 days. That's more than some countries' GDP for a year. Online sales add another $38 billion on Cyber Monday alone. People who didn't go to physical stores buy through the internet. The system captures everyone. This isn't free choice in the classical sense. This is choice formed by the most powerful marketing machine working year-round to prepare for this moment. 200 million people think they're hunting for good deals. Actually, they're the objects of the hunt. Fact 25. The Christmas tree, a 16th century invention, not a pagan ritual. Ask anyone, where did the tradition of decorating a tree for New Year's come from? Most will answer, it's an ancient pagan custom thousands of years old. Germanic tribes worshipped trees, decorated them in honor of gods, appeased forest spirits. Beautiful legend, completely invented. The first documented mention of a decorated Christmas tree, Strasbourg, 1539. City records report permission for citizens to cut small firs for home celebrations. This is the 16th century, not antiquity, not pagan times. The Reformation era. Before this, there's not a single reliable testimony about decorated trees in historical sources. 0 mentions in medieval chronicles. 0 images in manuscripts. Silence of sources for 1500 years of Europe's Christianization. So where did the tradition come from? The most likely version is connected to Martin Luther, founder of Protestantism. Legend says, one winter evening he was walking through the forest, saw stars twinkling through fir branches, and decided to recreate this beauty at home. Brought a tree, set up candles on the branches. The historical reliability of this story is questionable. But fact, in Protestant regions of Germany, the tradition appeared precisely in the 16th century. Catholic regions adopted it later, in the 17th and 18th centuries. Prince Albert brought the tree to England, Queen Victoria's husband, in the 1840s. He was from Germany. In 1848, the Illustrated London News newspaper published an engraving showing the royal family by a decorated tree. This became a sensation. Britons began massively copying the tradition. German immigrants brought the custom to North America in the mid-19th century. At first, it was exotic. by the end of the century, a commonly accepted norm. In Russia, the tree appeared thanks to Peter the Great and his decree of 1700. But it became a mass tradition only by the end of the 19th century, 400 to 500 years. That's the real age of the tradition, not millennia, not pagan antiquity, an invention of the late Middle Ages and modern era. A fact 26, Santa Claus in red, result of Coca-Cola's advertising campaign. Saint Nicholas, a real historical figure, Bishop of Myra in Lycia, lived in the 4th century CE in the territory of modern Turkey, known for charity and helping the poor, canonized after death. In the Middle Ages, the cult of St. Nicholas spread throughout Europe. In the Netherlands, he was called Sinterklaas. Dutch colonists brought the tradition to New Amsterdam, future New York. There, the name transformed into Santa Claus. Until the 20th century, images of Santa Claus were extremely diverse. He was drawn tall and thin, short and fat. Clothing varied: green doublets, brown fur coats, blue cloaks, red capes. No unified image existed. In 1823, Professor Clement Clark Moore wrote the poem, Quote 60, better known as Quote 61. There, Santa is described as an elderly elf with a round belly and rosy cheeks. But clothing color wasn't specified. Cartoonist Thomas Nast in the 1860s created a series of Santa drawings for Harper's Weekly magazine. The red suit appeared, but wasn't the only option. Other artists continued experimenting. 1931. Coca-Cola launches a Christmas advertising campaign. Artist Haddon Sundblom creates the image of Santa Claus for beverage advertising. Fat, cheerful old man with white beard in bright red suit with white trim. Colors, exactly like the Coca-Cola brand. The campaign continued for 35 years. Every year, new drawings by Sundblom. Coca-Cola placed them on posters, in magazines, on billboards throughout America. By the 50s, this image became dominant. Red and white, Coca-Cola's corporate colors. Coincidence? The company officially denies creating the image. But fact, after the 30s, alternative depictions of Santa practically disappeared. The red suit became standard. In the USSR, they created their own character, Ded Moroz. Initially, he was depicted in different colors. But by the 60s, red or blue kaftan became established. Influence of Western visual culture was inevitable. The modern image of the Christmas gift giver, whether Santa Claus, Ded Moroz, Père Noël, or another character, was formed in the 20th century. Ancient tradition? No. Product of mass culture and commercial advertising. Fact 27. New Year's cards were invented to increase postal service sales. London, 1843. Sir Henry Cole, high-ranking official of the British Postal Service, faces a problem. The recently introduced unified postage stamp, penny black, simplified sending letters, but volumes of postal items aren't growing as fast as expected. Cole comes up with a solution. Create a new type of postal item that people will want to send en masse. The Christmas card. He commissions artist John Callcott Horsley to create a drawing. Result: a lithograph showing a family at the holiday table with the inscription, quote 62, quote 1,000 copies were printed, sold for $1 each. This was a commercial project, not spontaneous manifestation of folk tradition, not ancient custom, a purposeful attempt to create a new market for postal services. The first years, the idea didn't take off. Cards seemed expensive and excessive. Why pay for a picture when you can write an ordinary letter? The breakthrough came in the 1870s. Development of printing technologies reduced production costs. Cards became accessible to the middle class. The Postal Service actively promoted them as a convenient way to send greetings. By the 1880s, Christmas cards became a mass phenomenon in Great Britain. By the end of the century, the tradition spread to Europe and North America. By 1900, almost everywhere. Card manufacturers created increasingly diverse designs. Religious subjects, winter landscapes, humorous pictures, sentimental scenes. The card turned into a mass consumer product. Postal services got what they wanted: explosive growth of mailings in December. In Great Britain, at the beginning of the 20th century, hundreds of millions of cards were sent during the holiday season. Postal workers hired temporary employees specifically for the December influx. Today, cards have been partially replaced by electronic messages, but the tradition stuck. Billions of holiday cards are still sent worldwide, and it all started with an official's attempt to increase postal service sales. Fact 28. Midnight chimes, a tradition less than 100 years old. Imagine, you're celebrating New Year's in a 19th century European village. Midnight arrives, and nothing happens. No chimes, no mass countdown of the last seconds. Most people don't even know the exact time. Mechanical clocks existed since the 14th century. Tower clocks adorned town halls and cathedrals in major cities. But accuracy was low. Different clocks showed different times. No unified standard existed. Moreover, the overwhelming majority of the population lived in rural areas. They didn't have access to tower clocks. Time was determined approximately by the sun, by church bells, by habitual daily routine. The concept of "63" requires mass access to accurate time. This became possible only with the spread of radio in the 20s of the 20th century. Radio broadcasts first allowed millions of people to simultaneously hear the signal of accurate time. In Great Britain, the BBC began broadcasting Big Ben's chimes from the late 20s. In the USA, radio stations transmitted time signals from observatories. Television strengthened the effect. From the 50s, people could not only hear, but also see midnight's arrival. Broadcasts from different cities, from squares, studios, holiday events. In the USSR, the tradition of listening to Kremlin chimes on the radio formed in the 30s. With the appearance of television in the 60s, this became a visual ritual. Families gathered around screens to hear 12 strikes. The mass tradition of "64" is even younger. It spread from the 70s-80s of the 20th century. Before this, people simply noted the fact of midnight's arrival, but didn't turn it into a dramatic countdown. The modern ritual, clock on screen, crowds on central squares, synchronized cry, "65, is a product of the television era. It's less than 100 years old. For many regions of the world, less than 50. The ancient tradition of meeting New Year's to the chimes exists for at most 1 or 2 generations. This is an invention of mass communication media, not folk culture. Fact 29. Champagne for New Year's, 19th century winemakers marketing. The Champagne region in northeastern France has produced sparkling wine since the 17th century, but the association of champagne with holidays and important events is the result of deliberate marketing strategy. In the 18th century, sparkling wine was considered a capricious product. Bottles often exploded due to carbon dioxide pressure. Production was risky and expensive. The drink was consumed predominantly by aristocrats. The 19th century brought technological improvements. Widow Clicquot, the famous Madame Clicquot, developed the riddling method, allowing wine to be cleared of sediment. Dom Pérignon perfected the blending process. Production became more stable, but the market remained limited. Champagne producers needed to expand their audience. They began an aggressive advertising campaign, linking the drink with holidays, celebrations, important life moments. European royal courts became the first target. Champagne houses sent free bottles to monarchs, courtiers, influential aristocrats. When royal families drank champagne at balls, this created an association with luxury. Then, sporting events. The tradition of spraying winners with champagne began in motorsports in the early 20th century. Producers sponsored races, provided organizers with the drink. Photos of winners with champagne bottles got into newspapers. Weddings, anniversaries, New Year's. For each event, advertising was created showing, the right way to celebrate this is with champagne. By the end of the 19th century, the association was established in mass consciousness. Cinema played a special role. Films of the 20s-30s constantly showed wealthy characters drinking champagne at parties. Hollywood transmitted the image. Champagne, symbol of success, holiday, glamour. In the USSR, champagne also became a New Year's attribute. Quote, 67. Began being mass-produced from the 30s. This was an affordable analogue of the French drink. By the 60s, a bottle of sparkling wine on the New Year's table became standard. The tradition of drinking champagne for New Year's isn't a folk custom rooted in centuries. It's the result of a century-long marketing campaign by winemakers who successfully linked their product with the concept of celebration. Fact 30. Quote, 68. Not a tradition, but a calendar. Quirk. In some countries, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Serbia, Georgia, people celebrate Old New Year's on the 13th-14th of January. Many consider this an ancient tradition connected to folk beliefs. Reality is more prosaic. This isn't a tradition, it's a side effect of a 20th century calendar reform. The Julian calendar introduced by Julius Caesar had a systematic error. The astronomical year lasts 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds. The Julian calendar counted the year as 365 days and 6 hours. Error, 11 minutes and 14 seconds annually. Over 1600 years, about 10 days of discrepancy accumulated. Pope Gregory XIII corrected this in 1582, creating the Gregorian calendar. He removed 10 days and changed leap year rules. Orthodox countries refused to accept the papal reform. Russia lived by the Julian calendar until the 20th century. By this time, the discrepancy had grown to 13 days. February 1918. The Bolshevik government issues a decree on transition to the Gregorian calendar. January 31st, 1918. Old style became February 14th, new style. 13 days were simply crossed out. The Russian Orthodox Church refused to transition to the new calendar. It continued using Julian for calculating church holidays. This created a dual system: civil holidays by Gregorian, religious by Julian. New Year's on January 1st, Old Style corresponded to January 14th New Style. In the 20s, some people continued celebrating the holiday by the old calendar, from habit or in protest against Bolshevik reforms. Gradually, this turned into an additional holiday. Not religious, not official, just a reason for feasting. By the end of the Soviet period, Old New Year's became a semi-humorous tradition. In the 21st century, many no longer remember its origin. Consider it an ancient custom. Actually, it's an artifact of a calendar reform that's 107 years old. The discrepancy between Julian and Gregorian calendars continues to grow. In the 21st century, it's 13 days. In the 22nd century, it will be 14. Quote 69 will shift further. Fact 31. There is no single. Quote 70 New Year's date. The astronomical year is the time of Earth's complete orbit around the Sun. 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, 46 seconds. A physical process independent of human agreements. But when does this cycle begin? Where's the starting point? Ancient Babylonians started the year on the day of spring equinox, around March 20th, 21st. Logic: day equals night, nature awakens, the agricultural cycle begins. Astronomical event connected to practical activity. Egyptians counted the year from the Nile's flooding, approximately mid-July. For them, this was the moment of Earth's rebirth, the beginning of fertility. Calendar tied to specific regional geographical reality. Celts celebrated the year's beginning at Samhain, end of October, beginning of November. Period of transition from autumn to winter, time when the boundary between worlds thins. Mystical rather than astronomical logic. Chinese New Year begins on the second new moon after winter solstice, somewhere between January 21st and February 20th. Lunisolar calendar, complex calculation system. Jewish Rosh Hashanah falls in September or October. Islamic New Year, on different dates, Because the Islamic calendar is purely lunar and not synchronized with solar. January 1st. Where is it in all this picture? It's not spring equinox, not winter solstice. That's December 21st or 22nd. Not full moon or new moon. Not an astronomical event at all. January 1st is the 10th day after winter solstice, an arbitrary point on the time axis. Julius Caesar chose it in 46 BCE because January was named after the god Janus. A political decision, not a scientific one. Gregory XIII confirmed this date in 1582, not because it's astronomically correct, but because continuity with Roman tradition was needed. Different cultures at different times chose different dates for the year's beginning. Each had its logic, but none was, quote, 71. The year is a cycle. A cycle has no natural beginning. Any starting point is conventional. January 1st won, not because it's truth, but because behind this date stood the power of the Roman Empire, the Vatican's authority, the military might of European colonial powers. This is the victor's date, imposed on the world through conquests and cultural expansion. Today, most countries of the world celebrate New Year's on January 1st. But this isn't recognition of astronomical truth. It's the result of globalization that spread the European standard to the entire world. Fact 32. Every, quote, 72 decree was an instrument of control. Let's trace the logic of all calendar reforms mentioned in these 33 facts. What's common between Julius Caesar's decree, Pope Gregory's bull, Peter the Great's decree, the Nazi Julifest program, Soviet New Year's? Control over time is control over consciousness. Julius Caesar reformed the calendar in 46 BCE, not from love of astronomy. Rome waged wars on 3 continents, governed enormous territories. A chaotic calendar, where priests arbitrarily added days to synchronize with seasons, created an administrative nightmare. A unified calendar meant a unified system for accounting taxes, military campaign dates, religious holiday dates. Caesar standardized time to standardize the empire. Pope Gregory XIII issued his bull in 1582 during Europe's religious split. Protestants separated from Rome. The Vatican was losing control over half the continent. Calendar reform was an attempt to restore authority. We correctly calculate Easter. We control church time. We determine the rhythm of Christian life. Accepting the Gregorian calendar meant recognizing the Pope's authority. Peter the Great forced Russia to celebrate New Year's on January 1st in 1700. This was part of a large-scale westernization program. Change the calendar, ban beards, dress boyars in European clothes, build a new capital. Each action, a blow against traditional culture that resisted modernization. New Year's on January 1st was a symbol. Now Russia lives by European time, by European rules. Nazis remaking Christmas into Julifest wasn't for reviving Germanic traditions. This was a struggle for control over symbolic space. The church competed with the party for influence over minds. Changing holidays meant displacing Christianity from daily life, replacing Christ with the Führer, turning family rituals into political acts of loyalty to the regime. Soviet power created secular New Year's in the 30s for the same reason. Christmas was a religious holiday connected to the church, and the church was the state's competitor. Replace Christmas with New Year's, remove Christ, add Dead Moroz and a tree. This is to hijack the holiday, make it an instrument of state ideology. Each calendar reform pursued the goals of power, unification of subjects, weakening of competing institutions, creating new identity, demonstration of strength. A holiday isn't just fun. It's a moment when people are emotionally open, when critical assessment of what's happening is reduced, when collective memories are formed. Who controls holidays controls the people's emotional connection to the system. Did you think New Year's was about family, gifts, joy? Yes, for you, about that. But for those who invented, remade, and imposed this holiday over 2,000 years, it was always about power. A fact 33, you're celebrating not tradition, but the result of 3,000 years of manipulation. So, 33 facts behind us. What did we learn? First, Babylonian priests slapped the king in the face during New Year's celebration to show time belongs to gods, not rulers. Control through ritual humiliation. Second, Julius Caesar chose January 1st arbitrarily and forcibly imposed this date on the empire. Control through administrative reform. Third, the Vatican moved the year's beginning 3 times and erased days from the calendar, fighting for religious authority. Control through papal bulls. Fourth, Protestant England refused to accept the correct calendar for 2 centuries because of hatred for Catholics. Stubbornness more important than truth. Fifth, Peter the Great forced Russia to celebrate under threat of punishment, using cannons and fireworks for intimidation. Control through violence and spectacle. Sixth, Nazis transformed family holiday into racial propaganda, replacing Christ with Führer. Control through ideological rewriting of symbols. Seventh, Communists connected New Year's with cult of personality of the leader. Control through creating new myths. Eighth, modern economy squeezes $600 billion out of December, using scarcity psychology and fear of missing out. Control through manipulation of consumer behavior. Ninth, all ancient traditions, tree, Santa Claus, cards, champagne, midnight chimes, appeared in the last 400 to 500 years. Most are less than 100 years old. This isn't folk wisdom. These are inventions of church, state, business. Every element of modern New Year's was invented by someone for their benefit. Every tradition you consider eternal was imposed by force, advertising, or ideology. You decorate a tree. You're reproducing a 16th century Protestant custom. You give gifts to children in the name of Dead Moroz or Santa. You're participating in a ritual created in the 19th, 20th centuries. You drink champagne at midnight. You're executing French winemakers' advertising script. You watch the clock in the last seconds of the year. You're following a television-era tradition. None of this was done by your ancestors 200 years ago. Almost nothing. 300 years ago. Absolutely nothing. 500 years ago. The holiday you consider a link to the past is actually a product of recent past. From Babylonian Akitu to modern New Year's, 3,000 years of power's experiments over time. You're free to celebrate. You're free to love this day. But now you know what you're celebrating, not ancient wisdom. It's the result of someone sometime deciding people should celebrate exactly this way, exactly then, exactly with these symbols. The holiday was invented 3 times, and each time, not for you. 33 facts, 3,000 years of history. 1 conclusion: the holiday you considered natural and eternal was actually invented at least 3 times, and each time for manipulation. From Babylonian priests slapping the king's face to modern corporations squeezing $600 billion in December. 1 mechanism: who controls holidays controls emotions. Who controls emotions controls people. Julius Caesar chose January 1st, not because it's astronomically correct, but because empire unification was needed. Pope Gregory XIII confirmed this date not out of respect for traditions, but because he was fighting for power over the Christian world. Peter the Great forced Russia to celebrate by force, not out of love for the people, but because he was breaking old culture's resistance. Nazis remade Christmas into racial propaganda. Communists built cult of personality into New Year's rituals. Marketers turned family holiday into the main sales season of the year. Different eras, different ideologies, 1 logic. Your tree appeared in the 16th century. Your Dead Moroz or Santa Claus in red suit, product of 20th century advertising. Your cards were invented by a postal service official. Your champagne, result of winemakers' marketing. Your midnight chimes became possible only with the appearance of radio and television. Not one of these traditions is rooted in ancient times. Most are less than 200 years old. Many, less than 100. This isn't folk wisdom of generations. This is constructed reality. Why did the myth of antiquity prove more profitable than truth? Because quote 74 quote requires no justification. It's its own authority. If they told you, This tradition was invented 30 years ago in an advertising agency. You'd doubt. But if they say, quote 76, you accept without questions. New Year's history shows how easy it is to rewrite cultural memory. 1 or 2 generations are enough for an invention to become eternal tradition. Mass repetition is enough for advertising to become ritual. Did you think you were hard to fool? That you control your choices? 33 facts proved otherwise. You're not celebrating what you chose. You're celebrating what was imposed on you. Tsars, popes, dictators, corporations, all wanted one thing: for you to celebrate by their rules, on their day, with their symbols. And the scariest part, you sincerely love this holiday. You wait for it, prepare, rejoice. Manipulation reached perfection when the object of manipulation doesn't feel pressure, when the imposed is perceived as one's own. How do you now look at midnight chimes and champagne? Do you feel free in choosing traditions, knowing that each is the result of someone's decree or advertising campaign? Whose side are you on in this story? Those who invented the holiday for control, or those who were controlled? And most importantly, how many more such stories are presented to you as irrefutable truth? The holiday was invented 3 times. You were deceived each time, and you thanked them for it. Happy New Year. Now you know what exactly you're celebrating. You've just learned the truth about New Year's. The holiday that seemed ancient and natural turned out to be invented 3 times. Every tradition you considered sacred, result of manipulation. And now the question: how many more such stories are hidden behind the facade of common knowledge? How many holidays, heroes, events that were presented to you as truth are actually carefully constructed myths? This channel exists for one purpose: to break your worldview. 33 facts at a time. No embellishment, no polish. Only documents, numbers, dates, and truth they preferred to suppress. If you think you already know everything, you're wrong. If you think you're hard to surprise, get ready. If you're confident you don't succumb to manipulation, the next episode will prove otherwise. Subscribe right now, because the history they told you in school is the version for the obedient, and here, the version for those who aren't afraid to learn the truth. The next episode will demolish another myth you considered irrefutable, and you'll be uncomfortable again. It will hurt again. But you already know. Enlightenment is worth the discomfort. Hit the bell. Each new episode, a blow to your comfort zone. Don't miss the moment when familiar reality cracks at the seams again. Welcome to the club of those who can no longer be fooled by beautiful legends. 33 facts, 0 illusions, only truth.